Well, hey ladies, this topic is for you, any married woman out there that struggles with that dreaded word, submission. Are you a submissive wife? And I have Melanie and Tracy in here today, and we're gonna talk about this. Now, the question I had for these ladies, when I first reached out to you to say, hey, would you come in the studio and talk to me with me about submission? What was your initial reaction, Melanie?
I thought my husband put me up to it.
Yeah, you did ask me. Did Scott tell you? Okay. Tracy, what about you?
Well, I was the same way. I thought Scott was guilty, but women need to know the truth about submission because I had a misunderstanding myself. And
yes.
So it's good for women to know the true meaning of submission.
Yes,
Yeah.
because here's the truth. Our culture has really framed submission in a very misunderstood way. And it's time for us as Christian women to kind of stand up to, Tracy, to your point, to kind of clarify what is submission, what did God mean by submission, what is our culture telling us it's supposed to mean, and let's have an honest conversation about it because it shouldn't be something we're afraid to talk about.
True.
Right?
True.
Okay, so here is the first point that we need to be aware of today, and this is what we're going to start with, ladies. Submission is not rooted in weakness.
Right.
Now, I think most women start from that point of view, right?
They do. I think they do because they see the husband as the provider and they have to, make him happy. And so they'll do whatever it takes to make him happy around the house and the children and whatnot. So I think it's so misunderstood from the very beginning.
Right. And that we think that submission is about our husbands kind of rule over us, right?
Right.
Woman, you do as I say, and we're just like, okay, right? Isn't that what you would think most women think about when they hear the word submission?
Right. Yeah.
I do. But then there's a root of anger that comes in too.
Right, right, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we think about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, in Genesis 2, what do we see there and how God created Eve from Adam? What does that signify about what God's view of Adam and Eve in their relationship?
I mean, it seems pretty clear that God was creating a person to walk alongside Adam.
Yes.
It seems clear that God was saying, this is to help you and to support together you're going to be a better team than how he was alone.
Right.
So it doesn't look like I gave you a servant, it looks like I gave you a helper.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's an important place for us to start. That when he took the rib from Adam to create Eve, and what he said is a helpmate, someone to walk alongside of you. Right. So the point here isn't that God created an inferior being in the woman, that the man had to rule over like he did the animals, right?
Right.
It was a companion to come alongside him that complemented him in every way, to walk with him in life, to rule over creation. Okay, so ladies, I want to talk about, let's go to Colossians chapter 3, because this is kind of where we're rooting ourselves today. And it's about the Christian household and how God established this. So we've already talked about that submission's not rooted in weakness. So let's see what God has to say. Here's what it says in Colossians 3. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting to those who belong to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and never treat them harshly. Okay, so what we see here is a command saying, wives, submit to your husbands, because that's what honors God. So there is in a role here how God designed the family to work, that he speaks to wives saying that we're to submit. Yeah. So what do you think about that? What does that say to you?
I mean, I think a big thing that I always have to think of is, how does this fit into the larger context? When I read the book of Colossians, I see God talking about reaching out and loving us and calling us to himself, and then I see him saying, now this is going to flow into the way that you live, and it should affect your relationships. And so how do you love others the way that Christ has loved us? Okay, so then when I look at Philippians 2, I love that passage because it's talking about how Jesus loves the world. Right. And it says he was equal with God, but he chose to submit and humble himself and make himself obedient even to death. Right. So if Jesus is our example of, he is God, fully God,
that's
and
right.
he chose to submit himself.
That's right.
How can we be offended if we need to do that in our relationships, in our roles?
Right. Yeah, because is Jesus inferior to God? I mean, what does the Bible say
Not
who
at
Jesus
all.
is, right?
Right.
Wow.
But in functionality, in role, Jesus humbled himself and submitted to the Father because that was what the Son did.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so I think that's a great point, Melanie, and I think it's important for us to think about submission, again, not from a term of being weak or less than, but a different role. And so that goes into our second talking point here, and here it is. A wife's role is to have a cooperative demeanor, putting her husband's needs ahead of her own. So I think if we're going to really understand submission, we think about it not in being not of equal in creation in terms of one being less than, but different roles that we play, right?
Exactly.
And so a wife's role in the family is to have that cooperative demeanor that says, I'm going to support my husband in every way possible, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think about that, Tracy? What's your thought on this cooperative demeanor?
Well, it was something that I really had to learn because when I first got married, I took the role of I was in control and you need to do what I tell you to do. So I was walking in front of him. And then I later understood, later I had the misunderstanding. I started walking behind him because he was following God more. And so I started walking behind him and I got jealous because his relationship was growing and mine wasn't, and we weren't growing together. Then finally, graciously, God showed me that you need to walk alongside of him and walk together because we are a companion, we're a couple, and we're to do this together.
That's good.
It was a big understanding for me, and it has really blessed our marriage in that way.
That's great. And I think that cooperative demeanor means our role is to come alongside our husband and make them the best leader they can be.
Exactly.
Not to sit there and be like, I have no opinion, whatever you say, honey,
Right.
but to say, how do I make you the best leader for our home that you can be?
Yes.
Because God gives us as wives insights into things that maybe our husband doesn't have. So we
Right.
come, again, that complementary role
Exactly, yes.
that we come along and make our husband the best leader of our family that he can be. Melanie, what's your thought too? You have a great insight in terms of just this idea we see in Ephesians chapter 5 about submission.
Yeah, I love to pull in the other passages because the Bible speaks about submission a few different
Right.
places, and I love to pull in the other passages to really get the big picture. And in Ephesians 5, the verse 21 says, all believers should submit to each other
Right.
in love. Then it goes on to say, wives, submit to your husbands. It's literally one verse after. So when you look at it in that context, I think what Jesus is trying to say is, relationships work well when we have a cooperative demeanor, when we care and want to put others' needs ahead of our own.
Exactly.
And in marriage, it should look like that.
Absolutely.
And I think God specifically says this to wives because somehow it's easier for me to be cooperative with my neighbor's kids than it is
Right.
with my husband,
That's
with
true.
some random stranger in the grocery store
That's
than it is
true.
with my husband. And I need to remember this is the relationship I have to keep first, and this is the relationship that I have to prioritize.
That's good.
So I should be
Right.
cooperative
Yeah,
with my
because you don't hear
husband.
people
Exactly.
fight against that idea of submitting to one another and peace and harmony
Right,
and serving.
right.
But then in marriage, all of a sudden we're like, what? You're going to tell
Right.
me to do what?
Right.
So that's a great point.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's end this last talking point is to the husband. So everyone has their role in the family, and here's what God said to the husbands. The husband's role is patterned after Jesus in his love for the church. Now, I think that's the harder gig.
It is.
That husbands are supposed to love their wives as Christ loved the church, and what did he do?
Yeah.
Died for us, right? He gave it all. So if husbands are loving us the way that we're supposed to be loved, then it is not hard for a wife to want to submit to that kind of husband and that kind of leadership. And again, Melanie, to your point, if we're submitting to one another, if my cooperative demeanor is about putting my husband's needs ahead of my own, and his love for me is about putting my needs above his, we are working together in a total complementary fashion.
Right.
Exactly.
There's no need to battle for power or control because that's not even what it's about.
Yeah.
So ladies, thank you for coming in today to talk about that because I think we need to not be afraid to say submission's not a dirty word.
Right.
It is not a concept that we should be ashamed of because God gave each of us a role, and the wife's role in the family is that cooperative demeanor. That's what submission's about, of making her husband the best leader he can be in the home. So I challenge you ladies, use the questions below, talk to someone about this in your world, and really be challenged to think about how you view submission and how maybe you need to make some adjustments. And we'll see you in the next video.